Okay, welcome to Warrnambool Library's online Zoom author talk with Katherine Kovacic. And if I could just ask everyone to make sure that their microphones are muted, just so that there's no background noise while Katherine's sharing her fabulous book with us, The Shifting Landscape. Now, I've got some information here. Katherine has 3 books. I've actually just read The Shifting Landscape and I've really enjoyed it. Cracked that out over 2 days, and there's a lot of local features mentioned in the book, so I encourage you all to grab a copy from either Campion Education Warrnambool, which used to be known as Warrnambool Books, or come into Warrnambool Library and reserve a copy. Actually, you might have to do that online or give us a call because of the COVID restrictions at the moment. So 3 books Katherine's written: Portrait of Molly Dean, Painting in the Shadows, and The Shifting Landscape. So wanting to look for something that's just now managed to go somewhere. I do apologise. So I'd like to introduce Katherine, and I'm going to spotlight you, Katherine, because people don't need to see me, and we can have a bit of a chat. Now, everybody, you can ask questions throughout the presentation. In the bottom middle of your screen, there's a little chat bubble. You can type something in there, and Katherine will be more than happy to answer those questions. So I'm just going to spotlight Katherine. There she is. Can everyone hear Katherine?
Hi, everyone.
Yes, we can.
Yep, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Okay, so Katherine, you've got a little bit of a story to actually getting to being an author. Do you want to just do a little bit of that before you then start sharing The Shifting Landscape with us? Because it's a bit of an intriguing story, your background.
Sure. Thanks for, I don't know if zooming in is the right term, but thanks for zooming in, everyone. Thanks, Jane, for the welcome. I have had a meandering career path. I started off as a veterinarian, primarily small animal practice, so in the suburbs. And I worked as a vet for several years. And then I really enjoyed that. And it was actually as a vet that I had the first thing that I wrote that got a bit of more widespread attention. And that was something called The Dietary Management of Gastrointestinal Disease in Small Animals. So it was really well received, but as I'm sure you can imagine, it was a fairly small and select audience who read that. Anyway, growing up, my family had a distribution business, and as we all did, you know, you work in the business on the weekends and school holidays and all that sort of thing. So I knew it inside out and back to front. And while working as a vet, we were going to expand the family business and we needed to put in a manager to do that. And so I said, I'll take 6 months off veterinary work and come and do the job that I know how to do. We'll get it done, no problem. So 6 months kind of became 3+ years. And during that time, I thought I would go along to Melbourne Uni and sit in on a couple of the subjects that I'd never been able to do because I'd always had my head in a science book, which was the art history sort of things. And in those days, you could pay them like a really nominal sort of fee and just go and do what they called auditing a class. So sitting there, not having to hand in anything or get a mark and just doing it for interest's sake. But of course, being me, I thought, well, if I'm sitting here, I may as well get some credit for it. So I signed up and did the first little minor thing. And then over the 3 years while I was doing the family business, that kind of became my part-time master's degree. And then that became a PhD in art history. So by the time we'd sorted out the whole family business thing, I found that I also had this entirely new career path. I kind of, I regret the veterinary thing a little bit, but I had this great time working with my family, which was a really lovely thing. And I don't have a pager anymore, and I don't have really weird shifts and after hours. So it's kind of balanced out a little bit. And I sort of have my animal hand in. I teach dog obedience classes when we're allowed to, go out and sort of hang out with people and do that sort of thing. So there's the animal thing there. But primarily I do a little bit of curating, and I'm in the heritage sector. So I work with historic houses and collecting institutions, museums, for funding and things like that. So when I'd finished that PhD, as part of that, I guess I found out how much I liked words and writing and getting back to all that sort of researchy sort of stuff. So I had that little kind of taste of what it was like to write. But what I also had was excellent time management skills. And I had this little window of time where I'd been doing all that PhD work, and I didn't want to lose it, because as I'm sure is the same for all of you, if you've got a little chunk of time, it very quickly gets sucked back into work and family and all those other responsibilities that we have. So to fill my little chunk of time, I took a novel writing course, 12 weeks initially, 2 hours a week and a couple of weekends. And then I did the second part of the course. And it wasn't that I had manuscripts under the bed, or a drawer full of half-written things, or even lots and lots of ideas. I just thought I'd like to try writing fiction. And art history had also given me a vague idea for a story, because it was when researching in art that I came across the story of Molly Dean. And Mary Molly Dean was a real person. She was a Melbourne girl, and she was a school teacher. So she was, in 1930, she was 25 years old. She was a very good school teacher. In fact, she taught what was then called the opportunity class, which was a primary school class for children with all sorts of learning difficulties. But Molly Dean also had a big ambition. She wanted to write the great Australian novel. She'd had a couple of things published, some poems, some short stories. But in 1930, she was ready to chuck her whole teaching career to throw everything at her dream of becoming a writer. She was from a middle-class background. Her father was a teacher. He died. She lived with her mother and younger brother in Elwood, nice Melbourne suburb. And she got involved with this group of artists called the Meldrimites, which is where I came across her story. So the Meldrimites were the art crowd, the wild bohemians in Melbourne of the 20s and 30s. And they were led by this guy called Max Meldrum, a very charismatic but rather peppery expatriate Scot who espoused a theory of art called tonalism, which is essentially broad brush strokes and a sort of a cohesive palette to give you a harmonic picture. And you probably know them as pictures that look a little bit misty, sort of out soft focus. And the best known artist in that group would be Clarice Beckett. She's a name that everyone's familiar with, which is kind of ironic because they were a very blokey kind of group of people. And in fact, Warrnambool Art Gallery have several of Clarice Beckett's work, as well as paintings by some of the other Meldrumites like Max Meldrum, Percy Leeson and Archie Cahoon. So Molly was involved with this artistic group, and she was actually the lover of one of the leading people in this group, Colin Colahan, who was probably one of the most well-known artists and probably the top artist in Australia of the late 20s and 30s. He was married. He had a long-term mistress, and by long-term I mean on again, off again throughout his entire life, and he lived well into his 90s. But Molly Dean was his lover during this period. But in 1930, in November 1930, Molly was coming home from an evening at the theatre with this crowd, and she missed the last tram home. And that had happened before. She'd walked home before, but on this particular night, I've just got a dog coming in here. On this particular night, about 200 metres from her home, she was ambushed, thank you, and she was brutally murdered, and the case was never solved. And so I'd come across this story a few years ago now, and I'd had a little bit of a look at Molly's story, but I'd put it to one side. And she kind of kept cropping up on my radar every now and then when I was doing work. And then a few years ago, I was doing some more work, helping to curate an exhibition at Castlemaine Art Gallery. And I was looking at Colin Colahan's old catalogues. And he'd had an exhibition in 1930. And catalogues in those days weren't the big glossy productions with, artist essays and lots of photographs. They were just little pamphlets, maybe 4 or 6 pages, lists of the works, watercolours, oil paintings, sketches, and just the title of the work and maybe a price. And about number 11 on the list in his catalogue, ironically, between a portrait of his wife, Violet, and a portrait of his lover, Muriel, was this portrait titled Molly Dean. And the very intriguing thing, rather than a price, it also had Inquire at Desk. So suddenly I had two mysteries. I had this painting that I'd never heard of, and I had Molly's murder. So the first thing I did was I went to the expert on Colin Colahan, and I asked him about this catalogue, and I asked him about the painting. Of course, he knew the catalogue, he had a copy in his collection, but he'd never managed to track down the painting. And this was a guy who'd spent years meticulously cataloguing every work by Colin Colahan. Great, a real mystery. We know Colin painted one picture of Molly Dean. He used her as his model in a nude painting titled Sleep, and that's in a private collection. But this portrait was completely off the radar. So Colin was a very prolific portrait painter. That's how he made most of his money. And he painted both society people and models. And as I said, he was a bit of a ladies' man. So as far as the models are concerned, you can get a fair idea of who he was perhaps having a bit more of a relationship with, because there's a little bit more shoulder going on, a little bit more skin, a little bit more, excitement in the face. But we've never found this portrait of Molly Dean. It's probably still out there. It's just that the sitter's identity has been lost. So that's probably a point where I should say, if anyone comes across a portrait by Colin Colahan of a young woman with sort of bobbed brown hair and bright eyes, please let either Warrnambool Libraries or me know, because I think we'd all be really interested in finding that one. But anyway, two mysteries, Molly Dean's death and this lost painting. And it was the painting that then gave me my protagonist, art dealer Alex Clayton, and a way to put together a story for Molly Dean. Because the other thing about Molly's story is that I felt I couldn't write a true crime of it, because all the official documentation had been lost or mysteriously disappeared, depending on which way you want to look at it, many years ago. So there was lots of newspaper accounts, but there was no official papers regarding the investigation or any of the suspects. But now I had a way to attack Molly's story by using art dealer Alex Clayton in the future, as far as Molly's concerned, so about the year 2000, to find this lost painting and investigate Molly's murder, effectively really as a way to increase the value of the painting she'd bought, but of course she becomes more involved in the story. So that was the book that sort of became the portrait of Molly Dean, which I think, Jane, you might have been looking for the cover before, but that was the first book. And what that really enabled me to do was to give Molly Dean a presence on the page. So I didn't want to write a story that was just girl gets murdered, and because the particular thing about Molly Dean was that her story had been lost in that whole artistic circle. She'd become almost an inconvenience to these artistic people. I came across her one time in regard to Colin Colahan in a timeline of his career, and it said 1930, Colin's lover Molly Dean brutally murdered, his career briefly stalls. And I think that was one of the things that really shocked me about the case, that her life had been reduced to being just a speed bump in his career trajectory. So fictionalising her story, giving her a fictional ending, was something that I really wanted to do, so that sort of, in a way, gave her a spot back in history. And I thought I was just going to write that one book. That was all I, really had in mind. Alex was created to do Molly Dean's story. But when I'd done the portrait of Molly Dean, I found I still had Alex sitting very firmly in my head. And she had a lot of stories to tell. And I think that's because the art world is a really grubby place. There are lots of dirty little corners in the art world with fakes and forgeries and paintings being ransomed and dodgy dealing. And, there was a story quite recently about some nuns in Italy secretly selling off all the icons from their convent and church to raise a little bit of coin on the side. So there's always these great stories that they really suit Alex. So then I ended up with the second story, which was Painting in the Shadows, which is that one there. And that is set in the fictitious Melbourne International Museum of Art, so in Melbourne. And the ironic thing, given that Molly Dean's story had such a firm base in a real case, the only factual part of Painting in the Shadows is that there's a cursed painting, and this cursed painting really exists, which kind of does my head in just thinking about it. So those were the first two books, and then we ended up with the third book, which is Painting in the Shadows. So, gosh, I suppose really a lot of you probably haven't read the books, so perhaps before I talk about Painting in the Shadows, I should tell you a little bit about the three characters that you are most likely to meet in all of these books. And I should say that although there are three books, you don't have to read them in order. They kind of sit by themselves. So the first person is my protagonist, Alex Clayton. She's an art dealer, but she's not a Turak sort of art dealer. She's not a black suit and pearls strutting up and down in her Manalo Blahnik kind of shoes art dealer. She's I don't want to say she's a grifter, but she's a jeans and blundstones, live by her wits kind of girl. She has a few clients, that she manages their collections, does a bit of buying and selling. But her main source of income is what in the art world is called sleepers. So she finds paintings that she can buy cheap and sell for a profit. So she might get them cheaply because they're in a regional sale and no one knows what they are. Maybe they're in the op shop. They might be damaged or just completely filthy. They might not have a signature, so they might have been attributed to no one in particular or the wrong artist. Or they might have even had the wrong signature added to them. So what Alex does is she finds these sleepers and she sees beneath the grime or beneath the false signature to what's lying underneath. So this is a really great trait for a sleuth to have, this ability to see what's really there. And of course, the other thing she has to do in her line of work is have a really good gut instinct and to trust her gut when she thinks something is right, no matter how appallingly filthy and damaged it looks. She has to trust herself and go with that. Another good quality for a sleuth. So that's Alex. The next person is her best friend, art conservator, John Porter. John is Alex's go-to guy when she's got one of those damaged or dirty paintings. And he's also a really handy sidekick when things get a little bit, mysterious or criminal. Having said that, John's a bit of an artistic type, so he's not into the heroics. He's a bit, the hands, mind the hands, they're my tools kind of guy. But he's a really, really good moral support. Alex and John have been best friends for a long time. They may or may not have been more than best friends in the past. Who knows? But they're firmly in the friend zone now because John is quite unhappily married. And trying to extricate himself from that mess. So that keeps Alex firmly at a distance. The most she does is offer unwanted advice from time to time because that's what friends are for. And the third member of this group is Hogarth, the Irish wolfhound, Alex's faithful dog. Hogarth has become a very integral part of this group. When I wrote The Portrait of Molly Dean, I wanted Alex to have a dog because she's a loner. A cat probably wouldn't have worked. You would have thought about her very differently. But I specifically chose an Irish wolfhound for Alex. You may know they're a very tall breed of dog. They're usually grey and they're quite shaggy. And they look a little bit intimidating, but they're actually really calm and quite friendly when you get to know them. And that's exactly the way I wanted people to think about Alex. You kind of stand back a little bit and have to think about it. But once she lets you into the club and you get to know her, she's really very friendly and nice. So Hogarth is a calm and steadying presence for Alex. He's also good with security when security is needed. But I chose the breed very, very specifically for Alex's character. And in a way, this comes back to some of the work I did with the PhD and veterinary work, because we do think about people differently when they have an animal in the same picture as them or actually in the same book as them. And that's a whole huge discussion for another day. So we think about them differently if they have a dog or if they have a cat or actually if they have any sort of animal at all. And then when we think about dogs, the type of dog they have gives us a real insight into their character or makes us picture them in a certain way. So Alex has this very calm and slightly standoffish dog. But I guess the best way to explain it is if I'd given her a golden retriever, who was like, I'm a golden retriever, great to see you, you would have thought about her very differently. If I'd given her a Rottweiler or a Doberman, that would have created quite a different impression. And if she had a little white fluffy or a Chihuahua that sort of fitted in her handbag and just yapped at people, that would have given you a very different impression altogether too. So that's the three of them. Now Hogarth he's become quite a presence by himself, which I really hadn't anticipated. And the first time I knew that Hogarth had a little fan club of his own was when my publisher said to me, the dog needs to have a Facebook page. And I think I just stared blankly at them for some time. And then I said, but the dog is a dog. He doesn't speak. What is the dog going to do on Facebook? And they were just like, trust us, dogs on Facebook. People love dogs on Facebook. So the dog has a Facebook page. He posts up events like Warrnambool libraries. He posts up dog type comments, and he posts up pictures of himself in various mysterious sort of settings, following clues. And yes, the publishers were right. The dog had more hits on the Warrnambool libraries thing than I did on my author page, and that seems to be the trend. It's the dog. What can I tell you? And the other really interesting thing that came out of that is, as I said, I still teach some dog obedience sometimes. And I've actually had a couple of people who have read the books and have then come to class and said, that dachshund in the dog park scene with Hogarth, that's my dog, isn't it? And I think I just blanked for a second, but then yes, that is your dachshund in the scene with Hogarth. So the dog became a very important part of the book. I actually got a couple of emails because he wasn't in the second book quite as much and said, why wasn't there as much dog in the second book? So Hogarth the dog, that is Alex, John and Hogarth, who you will find in all 3 books. I suppose I should talk a little bit about the shifting landscape now, seeing as how we're Western District and that's what we're here for. Are there any questions at the moment?
Not as yet. I think they're all engrossed. So just keep going, Katherine. Have a sip.
Sorry, it's really weird. I feel like I'm talking to myself and talking about me so much.
No, we're all listening with bated breath.
Excellent.
We're all out here listening, fear not.
Lovely. The shifting landscape. So the shifting landscape came out, on day 1 of Australia-wide lockdown this year, which my advice would be, don't ever do that. But it was on the trucks, it was on the way to the bookshops, and I think none of us really quite knew what we were in for with this, so that's the way it was. But the shifting landscape, in this book, Alex is called to Kinloch, the Western District sheep property of the McMillan family, and she's called down there to value their family art collection. The McMillans have been in the district since the 1840s. The art has been collected over several generations, so the current family essentially grew up with the work on the walls. They've always known it's there. They've thought maybe there's a few important things, but they've really got no idea what it's worth. And now they all want to know. So Alex is quietly hopeful that there might be something good there because obviously a long-term wool family, there have been some great boom years in the 50s and 80s. There's certainly been some serious money there in the past. Hopefully subsequent generations didn't sell off all the good stuff. But she's half expecting that it's going to be a few mediocre pieces and a lot of tat. But she does get an expense-paid road trip for herself and the dog. So she sets off to Kinloch, which is located somewhere near Hamilton. And when she gets there, she finds that there is, in fact, some rather good art. And in particular, there is an unknown and rather important painting by colonial artist Eugene von Gerard. As it happens, there is also a painting that was damaged in a fire. So Alex calls John to come and join her to see if this painting can be restored. The other thing Alex finds in Kinloch is a multi-generational family that is fraught by tension. There are issues over money, over who will inherit the property, and over the future of the property and its place in the indigenous landscape as a whole. So John's on his way, but before he arrives, the patriarch of the family dies in mysterious circumstances. Then John arrives, and shortly after he arrives, the Eugene von Gerard painting is stolen. At this point, Alex and John decide they're just going to leave the McMillans to it, and they're going to head back to Melbourne, and they just don't want to know about it. But then a toddler, a 3-year-old Chip, the youngest member of the McMillan clan, goes missing. And there's a question of, did he just wander off, as sometimes happens, or is there something more sinister going on here? And then Hogarth also vanishes, Alex's beloved Irish wolfhound. With fears growing for the safety of the toddler, and if you're Alex, the safety of Hogarth, obviously Alex and John aren't going anywhere, and they join volunteers and searchers scouring the countryside to look for Chip. Alex knows that the heart of this mystery and what's going on is all to do with the landscape, but she's really short on information. So the question is, will the landscape reveal its secrets to her in time for her to prevent another murder? So that's the shifting landscape in a nutshell. I think one of the questions I've been asked most about it is, why the Western District? Why set it down there? And I guess it's a multi-pronged answer for me. First of all, I like the area. I spent time down there as a vet student. It's magnificent country. It's got such diversity from the coast to that volcanic landscape to the farming area. And it's got such a rich history, both pre and post-white settlement. Obviously, the Budjim cultural landscape on the traditional lands of the Gunditjmara people has the oldest aquaculture system that we know of in the world, and it was fantastic that it was placed on the UNESCO World Heritage List last year. The Gunditjmara have used the larval landscape to create a series of channels, weirs and dams to harvest and grow and trap the short finned eel. So amazing landscape. And then, as I said, all those other aspects of it too. And then from that history, we have the history of dispossession and the history of the squattocracy. Australia growing rich on the sheep's back, to use that rather cliched phrase, but very true. Soldier settlement, and then the land as it is today, with farmers struggling to make a living and large corporations buying up farming land, and Indigenous people still sort of trying to get their voices heard. So there's this really rich sort of melange of things going on down there. It's a very, very sort of juicy field. And then, as I said, the land itself, and then for me, the art of the district, because obviously Alex, as an art dealer, she has to have a reason to go where she's going. And Eugene von Gerard in particular, I think has some great art for Australia. And the idea of his house painting was what really got me, because that was one of the things that he did when he was trying to make a buck in Australia. He came out to try and get rich on the goldfields, but did not manage to achieve that. So he was painting a lot of commission paintings for families in the Western District. And in particular, he was painting these sort of pictures of their houses. And so that was what I really wanted to tap into, that art, because all of the books obviously have art in them. There's the art that's hanging on the walls in places like Kinloch or art galleries, and that, I can be pretty free with that and sort of work out what's going to fit there, but tuck a couple of the sneaky little artists in that I just want to pique readers' interest with. And it's really lovely when people email me and say, I had to Google that artist or that painting, so that's lovely. And then there's the art that's key to the story, like the von Gerard in this case. But then there's also, because of the sort of person Alex is, art often reminds her of different things, or rather, I should say, life often reminds her of art. So she might be looking at an angry man, and it might remind her of the Velasquez portrait of Pope Innocent X or something. Or, for example, when the child goes missing in this story, the obvious one there is the McMillan paintings of lost children. I think he did a couple. And there were other artists who did lost children too. William Strutt and S.T. Gill did the Cooper Duff children, who were three siblings, sort of 3 to 9, who disappeared in the Wimmera for 10 days in the 1860s and were found miraculously alive at the end of that. So Alex has all these things going on in her head. I hope I'm not boring with that now. But for her, that's the way she sees the world. And I try to just sort of sneak those in there and not beat you as the reader over the head with it and make you feel like you're getting art 101 along the way. But it is just sort of part of Alex's view of the world. So that's why the Western District all sort of came together for this story. And in a way, it's become like almost an English manor house mystery transported to regional Australia. So perhaps I should read a little bit from the book, Jane. Would that work?
Certainly.
Let's see. So that's the shifting landscape there, which is the latest one. In this section, Alex had some thoughts about where the stolen painting might have been stashed. So she went in search of it. She took Hogarth. It was late in the day, night was just falling, and she left the car parked on the side of a small dirt track. And she and the dog are just getting back to the car. I open the door for Hogarth, who's standing a few metres away. Get in, I say. Dinner time. The magic words cause Hogarth to launch himself into a sprint from a standing start. As he does, there's a loud crack, and in the light spilling from the open car door, I see dirt kick up from the place he just vacated. It takes me a second to realise someone just took a shot at my dog. Maybe it was only a rabbit who made a careless mistake, I think. Then realisation hits. That was no accident. Shit. Hogarth is in the car and I reach in to buckle his harness. It seems completely irrational, but also eminently sensible. If I'm about to drive flat out on a dirt road in the dark, I want to do it as safely as possible. My hands are trembling and I can't make the damn thing connect. Come on, come on. I have no idea how close the shooter is or what they're doing. I'm sure I can hear the crackle of footsteps in the brush, but it could just be me grasping for breath. Finally, the buckle clicks home. I slam the door and sprint around to the driver's side. Hogarth is sitting up, growling and staring out the back window of the car as I crank the ignition and throw it into gear. At that moment, I glimpse movement in the wing mirror. Hogarth, down! I yell, simultaneously dropping the handbrake and flooring the Subaru. Thank God he obeys. There's a massive boom and the rear window of the Subaru explodes, glass blowing through the entire car. Shit. We fishtail onto the dirt track. I'm afraid to drive without lights on in case we hit a kangaroo, but I'm really more afraid of what might hit us if I put the headlights on. Fortunately, the track is fairly straight, so I just hold the wheel in a death grip as we thunder along the corrugations. After a couple of minutes, I ease up on the accelerator a bit and manage to wrestle my seatbelt on. That was definitely not a rabbiter, I say to Hogarth. I'm trying to lighten the mood, but it comes out all wobbly and teary, so I focus on my breathing instead. I'm just on my second in through the nose, out through the mouth breath when high beams light us up like Christmas. So much for the new age bullshit. I floor it again, and now I snap on my own lights. Not that I'm stopping for wildlife at this point, but at least now I only have to freak out about what's behind us. On the plus side, I say to Hogarth, chances are there's only one of them, which means they can't shoot and drive. I look in the rearview mirror and see the lights gaining on us. On the downside, whatever they're driving is bigger and far gutsier than the Subaru. As I say that, there's a sudden roar from behind and the Subaru jolts. The bastard's ramming us. Hold on, Hogarth, I scream. I have the accelerator jammed down so hard I'm pushing myself back in the seat, but the Subaru doesn't have anything more to give. There's another thump from behind and the car shudders, the rear end swinging to the left. I manage to pull it back, but we have nowhere to go. Another thump, harder this time, and the back of the car swings out again. I wrestle with it, but it's already too late. I slam my foot on the brake, but we're off the road, going almost sideways, and there's a massive gum tree rushing up to meet us. Hogarth! It sounds like the world explodes. I'm aware of the airbags deploying and Hogarth yelping, then everything is silent. For a moment, I don't move. My eyes are shut. I must have closed them just before the front passenger side of the Subaru met the tree. I force them open. Smoke, the whiteness of deflated airbags, a starburst of shattered windscreen, crumpled bonnet, the front passenger area obliterated, my hand sitting on top of the driver's airbag. My legs still move. Nothing is trapped, nothing hurts, except for a pain across my chest where the seatbelt sits, but my panting breath seemed to be filling my lungs without any issue. A scrabbling sound comes from behind me, and when I look over my shoulder, Hogarth is manoeuvring himself back onto the seat. The impact must have caused his rear end to slew into the footwell, but the harness has kept him safe. Dude! I unbuckle my seatbelt and try the door, which surprisingly opens without issue. We need to get out of the car. Get help. My legs wobble and almost give way when I stand, but I wrench open Hogarth's door and pull him out. Whoever ran us off the road could be back at any minute. Hogarth gives himself a good shake, getting rid of the adrenaline that flooded his system when we crashed. I, on the other hand, get a fresh burst of the stuff. The sound of a reversing car just reached my ears and I can see the distant lights rapidly drawing closer. Hogarth! I don't know how visible we are, but there's still a good moon coming up, so I start running back down the road. There are a few scattered trees that might give us cover. If we can put a bit of distance between us and our pursuer, perhaps we can take to a paddock, try to find somewhere to hide. But it's mostly open country here, and I'm betting the person who just ran us off the road has the advantage of local knowledge. Brake lights flash on the reversing vehicle, some sort of large ute. It stops at the wrecked Subaru. I signal to Hogarth and we stop too, screened by a tree. I don't want the sound of our footsteps to give us away, and I'm also hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever is after us. A figure steps out of the cab, but the light isn't good enough for me to discern features, only a largish shape. It looks like a man, but the baseball cap and bulky jacket make even that more of a guess than a certainty. Whoever it is, they're about to discover we're not there, so Hogarth and I better start moving. He's still wearing his harness, and I keep a hand on it so I can draw him into the shadows as much as possible and watch for somewhere that might offer a place to hide or even an escape route. Behind us, a car door slams and an engine roars to life, then sounds of someone attempting a 3-point turn on the narrow track. It's involving more than 3 points, but in a few seconds, Hogarth and I will be spotlit. We start to run again, and then I stumble and almost go down. But there's a slight depression in the ground, and it's the only thing on offer right now. I throw myself into it. Hogarth, down! I never thought that command would have so many real-life applications, but soon we're lying side by side in this excuse for a ditch. Sleep. Hogarth dutifully drops his head onto his paws, and as headlights approach, I reach across and cover his eyes. I have absolutely no idea why a corner of my brain has decided it won't be our two bodies that are spotted, but the gleam of wolfhound eyes. But why take a chance? The engine sound grows louder, and I grip my teeth, waiting for the inevitable.
Yes.
The shifting landscape. I hope that whets your appetite. As I said, when that came out, it was just lockdown city, but it's out there. The reviews were good. So moving on. And speaking of moving on, there is a fourth Alex Clayton book in the works, set mostly back in Melbourne, but with a few side trips to regional Victoria. That, don't know when that one's coming out, but the next one I'm actually doing, I'm just finishing up the copy edit for a non-fiction, a true crime book, Australian historical true crime, which will be coming out in January. And that, again, was a story that I came across while I was doing other research. And it really got me in. It hit me quite hard, made a very big impression. So I'm hoping other people will be as intrigued as I was by that story. But I think you're probably all a bit fed up with listening to me prattle on. So if anyone's got any questions.
I've got a question.
Yes.
This is from Michael. He says, you have some wonderfully rich contextual themes in play here. How do you manage the balancing of those themes so it doesn't become a crime or an art or an Indigenous ownership piece with a couple of either minor themes?
It's I think it's wow, that's a really difficult question to answer in a nutshell.
It's a big question.
Yeah. I think the thing that I find is that I always do a lot of background research, and then I put it to one side. So I think particularly with the art, I'm always very conscious, as I said, of not hitting readers over the head with it and making you feel like you're getting an education. And so I have some beta readers who are really great, who are not art people at all. So they get sort of first look at the manuscript, and I can say to them, yeah, do you think maybe that one should be there? And they always let me know if that's been a bit too much. The shifting landscape, particularly because it had that Indigenous history layer woven into it as well. I had an Indigenous friend look at that for me with regard to sensitivity issues and whether I was sort of hitting those right notes. And the story of the Gunditjmara and the Indigenous dispossession of that region, that's not my story to tell, but I do want to draw people's attention to it and to that part of Victoria and the Budjabin cultural landscape. So I guess in a way, because Alex has written in the first person, putting things through her eyes and the way she sees the landscape and the way she is exposed to these aspects of culture that she hasn't seen before makes it a little bit easier for me to find that balance between what the reader, what I would like the reader to see and not throwing too much in there. Does that kind of answer it? Yeah.
Michael, what do you think?
Yeah. Look, thanks, Katherine. I'm really interested in this. When you've got so many big themes, how you can keep them all front or for the reader front of mind, so that a couple of them don't get sort of sidetracked. So I think it's been nice to hear your perspective on that, because that must be a challenge, I think.
It is, and I think also for me, having Alex as an amateur sleuth, that means that the crime is always part of a bigger story. So I think if you were coming at it from a more of a police procedure or something like that, you're always really focused on the crime. But yeah. Alex is, she's never going to be one of those people who suddenly busts out the karate moves or finds that she can, fire a gun while driving a speedboat. And, that's not who she is. She's just an average person. So her unraveling of the story has all those other elements of society and the other things that are going on as well too.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Michael. I've got a couple of questions here. When someone reads your books, they'll understand she has a love of her car. Where did the that storyline theme come from?
Yeah, so Alex has a classic Citroen, you know, one of those great French cars with the lovely sleek lines and the hydraulic suspension. And so for me, that originally came in because Alex has that kind of design and art aesthetic. I thought, you know, I couldn't put her, you know, just in a little Ford Fiesta or something like that. She has to have something that's big enough to put paintings in the boot, obviously, but she had to have something that was just a little bit, you know, a little bit more stylish and swish than the average car. So a Citroen seemed perfect because around that sort of period, which is the 2000s, when Alex was said, they weren't quite as collectible as they are now. So it would have still been a cheap car because she's not, you know, always particularly flush with cash, but it's quite a stylish car too, and it's got room for the dog in the back, which is always good.
Yeah. Oh no, that was one of the thoughts that crossed my mind. Going back to the characters, I really enjoyed, and there was only like very small portions of Harry, the property manager. I could really see his story being developed elsewhere, so I don't know, you know, where down the track. Would you ever look at doing something else with another Kinloch 2.0 or something?
Yeah. I think, you know, Harry really developed for me as a character too, as I was writing him. You know, I knew he was going to be there at the start, but it almost felt like I got to know him more in the writing of the story. And I agree with you. For me, he's got many layers and a much richer story to tell. And it's obviously you have to be, it's a mindful of sensitivities, you know, when you're dealing with the cultural past as well as just the broader picture of the historical past. But, you know, sort of just researching the history of the Indigenous people in the Western District gave me a lot more to think about in terms of, you know, future possible stories that I'd like to write. The issue of soldier settlement or lack thereof for the Indigenous people was a huge thing. So there's lots of things. And yes, so Harry does feel like that he's a character I'm not quite done with yet.
And Alex definitely had, I think, I see a lot of, even in the art cover of the book, it's almost like I see a little bit of you. Is it as self-portrait-y sort of the book, you know?
I think, you know, there's always going to be a little bit of you as an author in your characters, but I think Alex she's much more savvy than I am. I think she's a lot gutsier too. So I think that, you know, you can't help but, you know, sort of have a little bit of that there. But yes, no, I think Alex is definitely you know, and I'm not such a financial gambler as she is either. I
don't. One of the questions, you might not have been asked this before, but are you a fan of the old UK Fake or Fortune show?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
I kind of get frustrated with it because I sort of think like they have 5 steps before you say, why didn't you do that back there? And of course, you know, they've had a couple of big failures that they haven't publicised very widely.
Do tell.
they had one a few years ago, and I'm trying to think. I think it was a constable, and it was a boat races. I think I want to say Barnstable Harbour. That might be wrong, but it was a boat scene on a harbour, and they went through their whole great rigmarole and attributed it as a genuine constable. Except that the particular type of boats and the rigging on the boats weren't in existence until about 50 years later.
Oops.
Yeah, and of course, so immediately that episode aired, all the boaties were just like madly online going, ah! And there have been a couple of other slightly questionable ones. And then there have also been those ones where, you know, they presented it to the society for authentication, and the society went, no, it's not, we're destroying it now. So the person actually ended up with not only an attribution, but no painting left at all. So, but it's a great show to watch. It's lovely watching that sort of sleuthing kind of thing.
Yeah, I do remember watching an episode. A guy was fishing near an airport, near a tip or something, and found a painting. And it was worth a mind-blowing amount.
Yeah.
It just came across it.
It's amazing. Don't you hate those people on Antiques Roadshow go, yeah, I paid £5 for it at a car boot sale, and they're like, it's worth $100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, but look, those things, they do happen. Op shops things do turn up. So, you know, there's always someone in the family who thinks that piece of art or that sculpture is absolutely hideous and will sneak out and throw it out when no one else is looking, or just think it's complete junk and, you know, goes to the op shop when someone dies. So that it does happen, folks. It really does happen.
Oh, fantastic. I'm just having a look at my questions here. If anybody else has got any questions in the meantime, just pop them through.
I was wondering, Catherine, you've whet our appetite wonderfully for the book, which I haven't read yet, I must say. But I'm interested to know, without you giving us the conclusion, have we got a happily ever after, or have we got a suitably resolved, or have we got a left hanging type finish?
In terms of the mystery in the shifting landscape, I like a book with a resolution. I really do. That was kind of my reason for not doing a true crime with Molly Dean, because even though some true crime people do that, and you get to the end of the book and it just goes, and we'll never know, that drives me batty, and that makes me throw the book at the wall. So yes, you do get a conclusion.
Well, that's good. Although I'm sure you'd like us to pick up the next book as well. Although there's no sequel for this story.
Well, there's another Alex Clayton mystery on the way. So yeah.
Oh, she's not giving too much away. You'll be able to reserve them all through the library, Barry. So we've got all 3 books, and we've got several copies of each. So even though the library's closed at the moment, they're doing a click and collect service. I'm not exactly sure. I think you still get your SMS alerts, and there'll be some instructions, or it'll be on our website. But definitely, yeah, go ahead and you can reserve them, or pop into Campion Education Warrnambool, which is the old Warrnambool books, or you can give them a call to pick up a copy as well.
I've actually got copies on order, but there
Well
were a few
done.
days, so it was perfect timing.
Were you the gentleman that was in there today, Barry?
No, not today.
No,
Yesterday I was there.
There's good sales happening in Warrnambool then, Catherine.
Excellent. Well, we'll have to come down and do like an in-person thing when the world is slightly restored.
Absolutely.
And bring the paintings with you.
I think we'll have our own Antiques Roadshow. You guys bring out the paintings.
Well, you know, why not? With the Von Gerard, Catherine, did you know that there's are you familiar with the Tower Hill area near Port? Yeah, and so there's the Von Gerard Lookout, which you can look across Tower Hill all the way through to Port Fairy.
It's great, isn't it? I know. I think Von Gerard was particularly, you know, for me, he's like the Western District go-to guy, because I think he had sort of some geological knowledge and particularly of larval landscapes. He trained in Austria in a region that had sort of larval flow. So that's something about that, you know, he really nails that Western District landscape. I think.
Yeah, and he's also done the one overlooking Geelong, so sort of coming from the west looking east. So he does those big, powerful spots. Like, he must have travelled so far and wide to pick that particular pristine spot that's just right.
Yeah, I think it's you know, I know he did some travelling with a couple of sort of like scientific expeditions, but he really did, you know, he toured the Western District to just kind of as a jobbing painter, and I think he also painted things that attracted him along the way that he could hopefully sell back in, you know, the bigger cities. But yeah, I think it's quite fascinating, sort of a snapshot of the region.
So your art, who are your favourite artists?
Oh gosh, that's really difficult. I'm sort of late 19th, early 20th century Australian is an area that particularly interests me, and I have a soft spot for a lot of the women artists who don't tend to get, you know, as much press. So Isabel Ray is one that I quite interested in at the moment, and she was in Europe during World War One. And she was near a lot of the Allied camps, so she has these beautiful little European scenes, but also these behind the scenes war pictures, which are really, really quite fabulous.
Okay.
So there's lots. It varies. I think Peg Clark, who's a photographer, so she's really interesting, and she spent some time in the Western District too. And she ran her, you know, like a one-woman photographic studio in Melbourne in the sort of late 40s, early 50s. And it's like, who knows about Peg Clark? So I get sort of very enthused about all these little forgotten people. So those are probably the names that you kind of find seeded here and there.
Dropped in.
Yeah. So people go, who is Peg Clark?
Ah, and there's, and you know, moving forward, the recently departed, is it Mirka?
Mora.
Yeah. What a woman.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And when you see those pictures of her when she was young in the 50s, you know, in the beautiful wasp waist thing, she's just this gorgeous, bubbly woman. And you see that in her art too.
And she documented so much of Melbourne's timeline, I suppose.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yay, the girls. We've got another question from Michael. Can he ask you about your editing process?
Yes. Okay. Where to begin? So when I write, I like to go through a complete first draft before I look at anything. But at the same time, I have to say I'm quite pedantic. So I often stall on a particular point. So a historical detail or something. For example, with Molly Dean, I had this bit with a phone booth, and I needed to know exactly what a phone booth looked like in 1930 and what went on in a phone booth. And even in the shifting landscape, so there's a desk phones again in you know, that was, you know, an older phone. And so I have to go somewhere like the Telstra Museum, which is great. Like it was open when it was open, like one day a month, and all these mad volunteers, you know, these retired Telstra operators and gents, you know, who'd been the linesmen and things. And, you know, you go in with a question and they're just like, yes. And you sort of have to set aside a lot of time for this, but you get absolutely everything you need. So I sort of stumble on a detail, but then I know other authors who will just put in like X's and say, fill in this bit later. And I can't do that. So first draft goes through. And then I try and put it aside for at least a week or so and just kind of let it percolate. And then while that's happening, I'm usually still thinking about it and thinking about where clues and bits and pieces need to go. And then I come back and I read through it with just markers. So I like my coloured pens and my highlighters. And I go through and I try not to do any editing at that point, because the temptation is to tweak it as you go along. But I find I really need to read it and sort of see how it would sit for a reader. And that's when you sort of find, oh, that should go there, or that bit's utter trash. Let's pull that out entirely. And I also try not to focus too much on the nitpicky spelling kind of things, although they always kind of hit you in the face first time around. So that's have a first big edit there. And then go back and sort of and go through and tidy up and add what needs to be added, pull out what needs to go. And then go through and do a finer sort of copy edit, which usually for me involves changing it into a completely different font, and a font that you really, really, really hate, because then it makes you read it. Because when you're sort of used to your own words, and for me, often things make sense in my head and they don't make sense to other people, and they don't make sense when I read what I put on the page. So I have to look for those bits that I thought were really clear but aren't. And for me, putting it in a different font, I've never quite descended to Comic Sans, but you know, an ugly font helps me focus on the words. And then I find if there are bits that for some reason I'm reading it and I think, it's not quite working, I don't know why it's not working. If I read it aloud, you can often hear where the sentences just don't flow right, that there's just that balance that jars on you. So that's a matter of finding the right words. And if I have a really big issue that everything really doesn't flow right, I go back to the previous chapter, because usually for me, I've found that if it's not right there, it's because I stuffed it up back there.
Okay.
So that's sort of, and then we're about at the point where a draft goes to my publisher, and then they get to come back to me and go, yeah, well, that bit right there. So, and then we start the whole thing again, only with about 3 other people having their say on what needs to come in and go out and be moved around.
On your book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And how the writing process. So, for example, the shifting landscape, from your first sort of concept to saying, yep, I'm going to submit it to the publisher, what sort of timeline are you looking at for that?
I think that one was probably about a year. So for me, sort of having the idea, I'd rough out like literally just sort of bullet points of how I think it would flow. And then I go away and sort of do some research on that, you know, the area and how I think it's all going to sit together. And then the worst thing for me is starting. I'm terrible at starting, and I've had to teach myself that my first paragraph is always going to be lousy, no matter what I do. And I just have to write the lousy paragraph and keep going. And then maybe at about the end of week 1, I let myself go back and fix paragraph 1, because it's just so, well, there's just something about starting the new project and being at the top of that 70,000+ word thing that is just very scary.
It's like a cliff, you know.
Yeah,
jump.
It is. Yeah. So that's it. You have to jump, and you know, it's those first rocks on the way down that you hit that you just kind of got to prepare yourself for that. So yeah, the shifting landscape was probably about a year. The true crime one that I've just done, I was really lucky that, being a nutty research person, I worked that way, because it meant that I'd done all my big, huge block of research before we went into lockdown. So then I was able to just keep writing and focus on the writing and pull it all together, because that would have been a serious spanner in the works otherwise.
Yes. Okay. We've got a question here from Sarah. Oh, not a question, Katherine, but a comment. As I sit here listening to you with my Jack Russell Diesel, I'm looking forward to reading a book with a dog as one of the main characters.
Excellent. I'm so pleased. And now you know I'm going to have to put a Jack Russell in the book.
Well, there you go. It's called Diesel. Oh dear. So I'm just going to have another look here at any of my last notes. We're nearly just on 8:30. So if anyone's got any last minute questions, I suggest you start tapping and typing away for me. I just wanted to ask you about the cover art on your 3 books. If you want to hold them up and show everyone again. They also, I mean, obviously art is very different, but all the art covers are very different. Do you pick the art, or does the publisher pick the art, or how does it work?
Well, they're actually all the same cover designer. So Nada Bakovic did all 3 covers. And she, usually what happens is she gets a draft of the book, and she actually sort of has a skim through and a read through and gets a feel for where things are going. And she gives us 3 or 4 sort of concepts. And I think with Molly Dean, there was 6. And this was just the one that everyone was like, you just about dove across the table to this cover. And I think Nada herself she's an Art Deco fan, so that probably explains that one. And so that's been the same every time. This one, you know, we went through various things that had sort of similar. I've got my hands crossed, but that one's got a little bit of picture framing on it, and so there was some concepts for picture framing on that one too. But there's a whole thing in this book about red paint and things like that too. So that's partly why that one came out as it did.
Yes, I've read the shifting landscape, obviously because of tonight's talk, but I've read some reviews, and all of them say, you know, you don't actually need to read them in sequence, but I mean you can, and that'd be great, but you won't be disadvantaged. No,
I think you probably get to know Alex and John a little bit more, you know, and the way their relationship works if you start at the beginning, but there's not sort of, you know, I'm not going to hit you with any sort of, you need to know what happened in crime number 1 for all this to make sense kind of thing.
Yeah, so if anyone's wanting to reserve them at the library and you can't get the shifting landscape because someone else has got it, reserve the other 2 and it'll keep you occupied. So I'm just having a look here. Are there any last minute questions coming through? If you've got a question, unmute yourself and might save it easier if you don't want to type. Anybody? I'll just have a look through the menu at the top. I think you've...
Could I ask a question, please?
Yes, who have we got there?
Catherine Ma.
Hi, Catherine. One Catherine to another.
Yes, Catherine. Yeah, there's lots of us in the world. I'm just wondering, how long each day do you spend writing?
Well, I've still kind of got a real job, the one that really pays the bills. So I'm an early morning person, so I try and do early morning writing. So at least an hour a day. I'm not someone who can I have friends who can do like the 15 minutes while I'm on the train kind of blocks of writing, but I really need to sit myself with my characters and the world that they're in. So I do try and do an hour, but at the same time, I don't beat myself over the head if I can't manage that. The worst thing is if I have the story really kind of bubbling and I really want to do it and I don't have the time, or that annoying work call comes in that we have to deal with something. Yeah.
Okay. So do you aspire to be a full-time writer, Katherine?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult question. I think that would be great, but you know, it's I think I'm pretty lucky to be published and to be where I am. So it's I'm enjoying the writing. So I think that really counts for it. So.
Well, congratulations.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, if we could all have sort of $1 million contracts and you know that sort of thing, but it's it's good just to be writing.
Okay, great. Well, we're pleased you are too. Thank
you.
Okay. And thank you to Warrnambool City Library too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine. We've enjoyed bringing all these online author talks. It's strange that out of adversity, we've actually adapted in some different ways, and it's actually been, you know, very interesting bringing it in a different way, and actually maybe a new audience that probably hadn't previously been accessing our real life author talks. So, and I suppose logistically for the authors, you know, they can sit in, not that they want to be in lockdown, but they can sit in the comfort of their own home and, you know, be all across Australia, you know, from week to week.
Yeah, I'm lovely to be in a room with people and to have that you know that dynamic sort of interaction. But you know, I did a talk last week and we had someone there from Broome and someone there from Dubbo, you know, and that was for a Melbourne suburban library. So it is great that you can talk to more people that way.
Yes, yes. Just call in any extra last minute questions. Has anybody got any? No, I think we've all inspired enough and saving your voice. Well, we absolutely want to thank you. Oh,
Sorry, just a comment, if I may, and that's thank you for being an author. I'm sure I wouldn't have the patience to do it, and it's been great hearing your story tonight in terms of how the process comes together as well as what the content is. So thank you for being with us this evening.
Thanks, my absolute pleasure.
That's lovely, Barry. And Michael, again, thank you, Katherine, for sharing your work and your process. Mm-hmm. So before we finish up, I might ask you, Katherine, if you'd like to tell us if anyone wants to find you on social media, where can they track you down?
Yes, well, there's Hogarth the Wolfhound on Facebook as Hogarth the Wolfhound. And I'm on Facebook as well as Katherine Kovacic. I'm on, Twitter as Kath Kov, KATHKOV1. And on Instagram as Katherine Kovacic. Internet, social media, it's crazy. But
or they can just go to your website and there'll be links to all of those social media resources there. That's fantastic. I'd like to thank you, Katherine, Campion Education, and of course the Corangamite Regional Library Corporation for allowing us the opportunity to do this. Going to remind everybody to try and grab some copies so that you can all get on the Alex Clayton bandwagon, because I can assure you that once you've got a taste of her style, and I do think she is stylish, yes, you'll want to read more. I would wish you, Katherine, very much success with your new what did you called it? You said non-fiction.
It's a true crime. I can tell you it's called. Well, can I tell you? Anyway, it's Australian historical true crime. So yeah,
Australian historical true crime. And look, if we're all out of this and you're doing a tour, come to Warrnambool in real life. We would love to.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you for hosting this evening, and to Corangamite Libraries for inviting me to come along. I'm glad we could do a Zoom version of the event.
Yes. That's fantastic. Can I remind everybody to stay safe, keep wearing your face masks, sanitising, all that sort of stuff, so we can get back to being normal people sooner rather than later. Katherine wants to get out of her house. She's in Melbourne. Yeah, so what I'll do now is I'll finish up the meeting. Catherine, if you'd just like to stay on for a minute, and I'll get everybody to just to end their meeting from their end. There'll be a recording of this on our YouTube page, or linked onto our Facebook page if anyone wants to share that with some friends that may not have had the opportunity to tap in. That'll be probably in the next day or two. I'll have that up. Okay, so thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, bye.
Thanks, Catherine.
Pleasure.
Okay, they're all,
Thanks, Catherine.
well,
Michael Hoffman, do you know?
yes. So it's just you and me. And